Hello everyone, this is Iran Talk, and in this video I'd like to expose the many lies of Robert Sepehr. As many of you may know, Robert Sepehr claims that he knows a lot about genetics, anthropology as well as history, but the reality is that this could not be further from the truth. In fact, as further evidence for Sepehr's delusions, one must look at the fact that he has stated on multiple times that his Iranian Jewish descent makes him a European, and for that reason he's an Aryan, and actually that the Iranian Jews are a European tribe. This absurd assertion will be falsified here using the latest available genetic evidence. What's more is that Sepehr believes that modern Iranians are heavily admixed with Arabs and other groups, and he actually admitted this in one of his posts before he took it down. And what this means is that Sepehr is completely deluded when it comes to Iranian genetics, as even the Iranian Jews are more admixed than the general Iranian population. What this means is that Sepehr cannot be considered to be of Iranian descent. It is also worth mentioning that Sepehr is half German from his mother's side and half Iranian Jewish from his father's side, Ben-Hur Sepehr. Ben-Hur was a very staunch Jew and actually created a video on the matter of the Holocaust. This is very interesting considering that Sepehr himself promotes neo-Nazi ideals. Now I will primarily be presenting genetic evidence to refute Sepehr's ludicrous claims. Furthermore, I will do a bit of exploration on Sepehr's hatred for Iranians, especially modern-day non-Jewish Iranians. Without further ado, I'd like to begin this expose. To begin, Robert Sepehr made this controversial post on his X account. What Sepehr wrote was, Iran was conquered by Arabs in 654, its Indo-European language converted to Arabic script, its Aryan people forced into Islam. That said, under its monarchy, it still resembled most European cities until it was overthrown by revolution in 1979. Europe is now facing a similar fate. Now, this image is not from pre-revolutionary Iran, but rather, as the reader's added context says, this photo is not from Iran, but is a still image from a German movie named Schoolgirls Report 75. For those of you who don't know, Schoolgirls 75 is actually a pornography film. And it's rather unfortunate that Sepehr has to resort to utilizing porn films to prove that Iran was very modern, whereas the reality is that this particular film has nothing to do with Iran. Thus, this post exposes Robert Sepehr as a liar. Here's a zoomed in version of the bottom image, and basically what Sepehr does here is he attempts to equate modern day Iranian Jews with pure blood Aryans. And what he basically highlights here is that modern day Iranian Jews were exempt from the racial laws of Nazi Germany, and for this reason they were pure blood Aryans. In fact, on many occasions, Sepehr has attempted to emphasize the relationship between his Jewish ancestry as well as his European ancestry, and he considers them to be one and the same. For this reason, Sepehr promotes the lie that modern-day Iranian Jews are more genetically contiguous than the general Iranian population. I will provide a genetic analysis to refute these ludicrous claims. You must keep in mind that this is Robert Sepehr's father, and clearly he does not have a European phenotype but a very Semitic phenotype. What this means is that Robert Sepehr's deceased father is anything but Aryan. And as previously mentioned, Ben-Hur Sepehr directed a film on the Holocaust. Thus, Ben-Hur Sepehr was anything but Aryan, and this very much reflects the delusional mindset of Robert Sepehr. Moving on, here is an image of Robert Sepehr, and this man does not look European. From the phenotype, you can see clear Semitic influences, especially Jewish influences. What's more is that he's hiding his film degree. And because of Robert's lack of qualifications in genetics, anthropology, and history, he should not be trusted in these fields. Up next, what you'll be able to see is that much of what Robert says about genetics is a lie. The reality is that Robert Sepehr is actually a pathological liar, much like Jason Raza Georgiani. Before I present my genetic analysis, here is just something that was very interesting that Sepehr once wrote about. He basically stated, indigenous Europeans are descended from three distinct lineages. This presentation covers the most current archaeological and genetic evidence describing who they were, where they originated from, when they have arrived, and how modern Europeans came to be. For those of you who don't know, Sepehr is referring to the steppe pastoralists, the early European farmers, and the Western hunter-gatherers. I presented this to emphasize how delusional Robert Sepehr is about his own genetics. What you will see here with the genetic evidence is that the Iranian Jews of today are anything but Aryan and do not primarily descend from the three aforementioned groups. These are the source populations I will be using, and you can see that there's an Andronovo source, there's a Sagabi Iran Chalcolithic source, there's a Caucasian Kura-Araxes source, a late Bronze Age Neo-Assyrian source, an Israel Iron Age source, an ancient Hellenic Greece Delphi Iron Age source, a Syria Tel Khorassan Umayyad source, a Kazakhstan Karakanid medieval Turkic source, an Iran Shakri Sokta Bronze Age II Indus Valley source, and finally a Sub-Saharan African Bantu source. Here are the results for the contemporary Iranian Jews, and you can see that they're on average 34.4% Sagabi Chalcolithic, 28.2% Israel Iron Age, 16.4% Neo-Assyrian from Nemric from the late Bronze Age period, 8.2% Andronov from Russia, 7.8% Iron Age Hellenic, 3.2% Tel Khorassan Umayyad, 1.0% South Asian, and 0.8% Caucasian. With these results, you can see that the Iranian Jews of today are largely a Middle Eastern population with only minimal European contribution, and that mostly comes from a Russia Andronov source, though it is nonetheless minimal at 8.2%. Thus, these results prove that the Iranian Jews of today are anything but Iranian or Aryan or even European. For this reason, Robert Sepehr is indeed delusional. Now, here are the results for the contemporary Iranians. What you can see is that the Iranians of today are on average 56.8% Sagabi Chalcolithic, 17.2% Andronov, 6.1% Bronze Age Caucasian, 4.8% Shakri Sokta Bronze Age II, so this is South Asian ancestry, 4.3% Israel Iron Age, 3.4% Kazakhstan Karakanid, 2.8% Neo-Assyrian from Nemric, 2.4% Greece Delphi, 2.1% Tel Khorassan Umayyad, and 0.1% Sub-Saharan African. These results prove that the modern-day Iranians are actually more genetically contiguous than the Iranian Jews. What's more is that the Iranians of today have less Semitic ancestry and actually have more Indo-European ancestry compared to the Iranian Jews. Thus, these results refute the ludicrous claims made by Robert Sepehr that modern-day Iranians are very mixed, whereas the Jews of Iran are much purer. Therefore, Robert Sepehr is indeed a liar, a true pathological liar, as I previously mentioned. Sepehr's falsification of genetics and history is not only restricted to Iran and Europe, but also Africa. This is evident from this ex-post in which Sepehr wrote, "The Moors were not black sub-Saharan hunter-gatherers either, but originally white Berbers who were converted to Islam, had African slaves, and are also being erased from history. The internet has been scrubbed and AI is programmed to be woke. Online sources cannot be trusted." A point I must emphasize here based on the available genetic evidence is that the Moors were neither sub-Saharan Africans or Europeans. In fact, the Moors were primarily of North African descent, and the North Africans, even during the ancient period, were fairly mixed between European and Middle Eastern ancestries with a minor amount of sub-Saharan African contribution. I will present evidence for this assertion utilizing Davidsky's Global 25 calculator. Here are the source populations I will be using, and they primarily date to the Neolithic. You can see that there's an indigenous North African Ibero-Mauritian source, there's a Levant PPNB source from Jordan, there's a Turkey late Neolithic Anatolian farmer source, there's an Iranian farmer source from Ganjdara, there's a Georgia Codius Caucasus hunter-gatherer source, there's a steppe Proto-Indo-European Yamnayan source, there's an East Asian source from Siberia from Devil's Cave, there's an Irola South Asian hunter-gatherer source, there's a Sub-Saharan African source from Congo, and this is Proto-Historic African, and finally there's a 4,500-year-old Ethiopian source as well. Here are the results for some of the most isolated and ancient Berber populations, including the Canarians, the one Kirkwan Iron Age sample from Tunisia, as well as the Ovilava Roman African outlier from Austria. As you can clearly see, the ancient Berbers were on average 40.7% Barcine late Neolithic, 34.1% Ibero-Mauritian, 8.1% Jordan PPNB, 7.5% steppe, 5.3% ancient sub-Saharan African from the Congo, 2.3% Georgia Courteous Caucasian hunter-gatherer, 1.5% ancient East African, and 0.5% Iranian farmer. Thus, what these results prove is that the Berbers from the ancient period, including the Canarians, who are an isolated Berber tribe, are largely of mixed genetic origins and have significant Middle Eastern, North African, European ancestry with a bit of Sub-Saharan African ancestry as well. Thus, these results refute the claims made by Robert Sepehr that the ancient and medieval Berbers were white. And as further evidence for the medieval Muslim Iberians not primarily being of European descent, I will be breaking down the samples from that particular era that are available in Davitsky's Global 25 dataset. Here are the source populations that I will be using, and you can see that there's a pre-Islamic Iberian component, there's an ancient Berber component, there's an Israel Iron Age component, a Tal Khorassan Umayyad component, and a Sub-Saharan African component. Here are the results for these ancient Islamic Iberians, and you can see they're on average 53.9% pre-Islamic Iberian, 32.8% ancient Berber, which is made up of the three ancient Berber samples that I broke down previously, 12.5% Israel Iron Age, 0.6% Sub-Saharan African, and 0.2% Tel Khorassan Umayyad. What's evident from these results is that the Moors of Iberia were definitely not a European or white population, but rather were of mixed Middle Eastern, European, and North African origins. Thus, these results falsify the claims made by Robert Sepehr that the Moors were a European population. In fact, what's evident from these results is that most of the Islamic Iberian population had significant Berber and Middle Eastern ancestry, which is very interesting, and this goes to show that they were quite a mixed population, unlike the claims made by Robert Sepehr. Moving on, Robert's delusions are not only restricted to Iran, Europe, or North Africa, but also the Levant. As you can see in an X post, one individual who was very intelligent wrote, "Phoenicians and Carthaginians were Canaanites, not white." In response to him, Robert wrote, "Always a low IQ, anon spamming my comments." And as support for his claims, Robert posted an image of a study which basically took a look at the genetic origins of Chalcolithic era Israelite populations. And this is very interesting, as what was found is that they had blue eyes. Because of this, Robert foolishly assumed that they were genetically European. What he basically is stating is that these ancient Israelites had the same genetic makeup as modern-day Europeans. But as you'll see with my genetic analysis, this is not the case. And in response to this ridiculous claim made by Robert Sepehr, Myro Sayo wrote, "You're posting the Pekin late Chalcolithic samples as an example of what exactly, and a news article no less. They were derived from Natufians and Chalcolithic Sagabi-like Iranians. They are equidistant between Yemenis and Samaritans and had 0% European ancestry." Now I took a look at the claim made by Myro myself, and here are the results I came up with. As you can see, the Chalcolithic era Pekin Levantine population was on average 79% Levant PPNB from Jordan, of which half is Anatolian farmer and the remaining half is Natufian, 14.2% Sagabi Chalcolithic, 4.2% Israel Natufian, and 2.6% Barcine late Neolithic. These results prove that the blue-eyed Chalcolithic population referenced by Sepehr from Israel was actually mostly of indigenous Middle Eastern stock. Thus, Robert Sepehr is once again refuted by the latest available genetic evidence that he has denied for such a long time. Here is another delusional expose from Robert Sepehr. What Sepehr wrote was, "What a woke crock of shit. Hannibal was Phoenician. Ancient Phoenician DNA from Carthage shows genetic affinities with modern Europeans. The word Europe itself comes from Europa, a Phoenician princess. Have you no shame at all?" And he also posted a link to one of his videos on the goddess and the bull. And Sepehr went on to further write, "Lebanese Phoenicians were destroyed by Alexander the Great. Hannibal was from their second capital in Carthage. That said, modern descendants are infused with an 8% admixture of sub-Saharan DNA after the Roman period 2000 years ago. Ancient Phoenicians were much more fair." As a response to Sepehr's delusions, Miro Sayo wrote, "No, Lebanese don't average an additional 8% sub-Saharan African. Lebanese Muslims average 2% and Lebanese Christians under 1%. The frequency of derived variants that code for lighter pigmentation were lower back then, not higher. It's not like we don't have hundreds of whole genome sequences 1_2XC or anything." Thus, once again, Miro exposed the ludicrous claims made by Robert Sepehr and his delusions, and I will present genetic evidence both from Miro's X account as well as my personal research to refute Sepehr. But before I do that, it is worth mentioning that Miro actually blocked Robert Sepehr, as he wrote, "The coward blocks those who out him as a fraud who doesn't know anything." As further evidence against Sepehr, here are the results I came up with for ancient Levantine populations. And these were done utilizing Davidsky's Global 25 calculator. These are all of the Levantine populations since the Bronze Age all the way up until the medieval period. You can see that there are on average 50.2% Levant PPNB from Israel, 22.1% Ganj Dara Neolithic from Iran, 16.6% Barcine Late Neolithic from Turkey, so this is Anatolian farmer ancestry, 8.1% Georgia Codius Caucasian hunter-gatherer, 2.8% Proto-Indo-European Yamnayan, and only 0.2% Sub-Saharan African. Thus, with these results, you can see that the ancient and medieval Levantines were primarily of indigenous Middle Eastern descent. Once again refuting Robert Sepehr. Moving on, here are the results for modern-day Levantines that were posted by Miro Sayo. You can see that contemporary Levantine populations based on these calculations are on average 76.3% Roman era Levantine, 10.4% Classical Greek, 9.7% Bactrian, 3.0% Arab from the Umayyad period, and only 0.6% Sub-Saharan African. And the populations featured in this analysis are the Palestinian Christians, the Lebanese Christians, the Syrian Christians, the Jordanian Christians, the Lebanese Druze, the Israeli Druze, and the Alawites. These results do not include the Muslim Levantines, and I will get into their origins next. Here are the results Miro published on his X account concerning the genetic origins of the Muslims from the Levant. As you can see, the populations analyzed include the Palestinian Muslims, the Lebanese Muslims, the Syrian Muslims, the Jordanian Muslims, and finally the Bedouins from the Negev from Israel. With these results, you can see that these populations are on average 52.3% Roman era Levantine, 25.7% Arab from the Umayyad period, 14.2% Bactrian from the Kushan period, 4.8% Sub-Saharan African, and 3.1% Classical Greek. Thus, with these results, you can again see mostly descent from Middle Eastern populations with only minimal contribution from a Sub-Saharan African source. And these results again refute the delusional mindset of Robert Sepehr. In fact, aside from the Negev Bedouin A sample, you can see that the Sub-Saharan African ancestry in these modern-day Muslims from the Levant does not exceed more than 5.8% in the Palestinian Muslim. Up next, I will present the results that I personally came up with using the Global 25 to refute Sepehr's claims that the modern-day Lebanese have 8% Sub-Saharan African ancestry. These are the source populations that I will be using, and you can see that there's the Levant Iron Age source, a Mesopotamia Neo-Assyrian Bronze Age source from Nemric, a Late Bronze Age Armenian source from Beni Amin, a Turkmenistan Iron Age Yaz source, a Bronze Age Greek source, a Late Antiquity Arabian source, an Indus Valley Bronze Age source, an Anatolian Ottoman source, and a Sub-Saharan African source. Here are the results I came up with for the generic Lebanese dataset. The Lebanese Christians, the Lebanese Druze, and the Lebanese Muslims are on average 32.7% Levant Iron Age, 22.2% Bronze Age Greece, 19.3% Late Bronze Age Armenia, 11.6% Mesopotamian Neo-Assyrian, 10.5% Late Antique Arab, 1.7% Indus Valley Bronze Age, 1.5% Sub-Saharan African, and 0.5% Anatolian Ottoman. What's evident from these results is that on a genetic level, the Lebanese are mostly of indigenous Middle Eastern ancestry, and at the most, their Sub-Saharan African ancestry is at 2.4%. Here are the results for Lebanese ethno-religious communities from across Lebanon, including Maronite Christians, Orthodox Christians, as well as Shiite and Sunni Muslims. You can see that there are on average 30.8% Levant Iron Age, 20.2% Bronze Age Greece, 19.4% Mesopotamia Neo-Assyrian, 15.6% Late Bronze Age Armenia, 9.9% Late Antique Arab, 1.8% Indus Valley Bronze Age, 1.7% Sub-Saharan African, and 0.4% Anatolian Ottoman. With these results, you can see a bit more variance. Nonetheless, once again, the sub-Saharan African ancestry is at a minimal and only averages to 1.7%. This ancestry peaks in the Sunni Muslims from Beirut at 4.2% and is lowest among the Maronite Christians from Jakarta, as well as the Dinya Sunni Muslims at 0.4%. Thus, these results prove that Sepehr is completely clueless where it concerns the genetic origins of the Lebanese, as their sub-Saharan African ancestry is not at 8%, but rather the peak is at 4.2% and the average is 1.7%. These results also highlight the delusions of Robert Sepehr and prove that he is indeed a pathological liar. Before I conclude, I'd just like to mention Robert Sepehr's delusions where it concerns ancient Egypt. Sepehr has actually started many threads on his X account to prove that the ancient Egyptians were Nordic Europeans, and he actually even posted images of some red-haired and blonde-haired mummies and claimed that they were of European descent, particularly Northern European descent. Now, I won't get into any of those posts specifically since they're ridiculous, but this is one post that I will get into because Robert is being very rude here. As a response to someone who stated that Europeans have no connection to ancient Egypt, Robert Sepehr wrote, "You can beat your wives, my Muslim friends, but when it comes to anthropology, you're my bitch." And then he linked his video titled Ancient DNA of Egypt and the Middle East, and after that he also linked an image of the article that said that the ancient Egyptians were closer to Europeans than to modern Egyptians. To refute this lie from Robert Sepehr as well as the media's misreporting, here are the results for Egyptian Third Intermediate Period samples. This average consists of two samples that were from the study that was referenced by the article in Sepehr's post. These samples were on average 37.2% Levant Neolithic from Israel, 29.6% Natufian, 12.0% Caucasian hunter-gatherer, 11.8% Barcine Late Neolithic, 6.6% Iran Neolithic, 1.8% Morocco Ibero-Mauritanian, and 1.0% Sub-Saharan African. Thus, with these results, you can see that the ancient Egyptians were primarily of Middle Eastern descent with no European and only minimal Sub-Saharan African ancestry, therefore refuting both Robert Sepehr's post as well as the featured article. Finally, here are the results for contemporary Egyptians, and these are from a good friend of mine who goes by the name of Balka Glue. Both Coptic and Muslim Egyptians are featured here. The averages of these two populations are 75.8% ancient Egyptian, 13.5% medieval Levantine, 4.9% Nilotic, 3.8% Iron Age Berber, and 2.0% West African. It is worth mentioning that the Coptic Egyptian average is made up of 17 individuals and the Muslim average is made up of 55 individuals. In terms of ancient Egyptian ancestry, Coptic Egyptians have around 94.2% and Muslim Egyptians have 57.4%. Thus, the available genetic evidence refutes the ludicrous claims made by Robert Sepehr. For this reason, I call on Robert Sepehr to accept the available genetic evidence instead of lying and spreading misinformation. To conclude, this video served as an expose of the many lies of Robert Sepehr. What was proven is that Sepehr is indeed a pathological liar. And this was further evident from the genetic evidence I presented, which was in contrast to the ludicrous claims made by Sepehr. I reckon that this is due to some sort of inferiority complex where it concerns his Iranian half, particularly his Iranian Jewish half. What Robert does is promote Nordicism and Eurocentrism at the expense of indigenous Middle Eastern and North African civilizations. And he has done this through the promotion of pseudoscientific theories. Overall, what I proved was that Robert Sepehr is a fraud. That's essentially it for this expose. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.